They say the dead can't speak. But the truth is, they scream. It's the living who've forgotten how to hear them. Let me take you to a hill no map marks, where a building once stood with no address, no records, and no mercy. Locals called it the Hill House. The church called it St. Elora's House of Restoration for Wayward Girls. But we call it what it truly was, a machine of erasure. From 1862 to 1891, 143 girls entered through its rusted gates. None came back. No birth certificates. No graves. Just names, and then silence. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a system. And it was designed to disappear the inconvenient, the clever, the rebellious, to scrub away their existence under the guise of salvation. You were never meant to hear this. What's buried in the shadows of St. Elora isn't just dark, it's forbidden. They built it with stone and prayer, but behind those 18-inch walls lay something older than faith and hungrier than time, obedience, harvested like wheat. And now, after a century of silence, the ledger has surfaced. The Red Book. 143 entries. First names. Numbers. Then a column marked fate. Most said, departed. Some were blank. And a few, only bore an X. No dates. No details. Just finality. These weren't girls sent to be saved. They were girls chosen to be erased. And one by one, they vanished. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. In the wind that wraps the sycamore trees. In the bell that tolls, though the tower has fallen. In the space between memory and nightmare. This is not folklore. This is a truth someone buried with holy hands and closed eyes. But you're awake now. And once you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll never unsee the system. Welcome to St. Elora. Welcome to the beginning of your descent. You're not here for entertainment. You're here because part of you suspects there's something wrong, something that's always been wrong. And now, piece by piece, I'm going to show you how far the rot goes. Listen closely. And don't look away. Because once you hear the names, they become part of you. The fog never fully lifted from the hillside where St. Elora stood, as if the land itself knew what was done there and refused to forget. Behind the wrought iron gate, under the carved stone, that red house of restoration, was not a sanctuary but a sanctified prison. Mother Agatha Vale arrived with no husband, no past, and 3 trunks, one filled with wool habits, one with surgical tools, and the last, filled with books bound in red leather, pages already stained with ink, and something darker. She wasn't a nun. She was a purifier. A visionary. A zealot. She believed that wickedness in girls was congenital, not in the heart, but in the marrow. Her doctrine was surgical. To cleanse the soul, the body had to suffer. Silence was salvation. Names were indulgence. And pain was holy. That's why the first thing stripped from every girl wasn't her clothing. It was her identity. Upon arrival, each girl was shaved, numbered, and uniformed in gray wool. They weren't called by their names. They weren't allowed to speak without permission. Some never spoke again. They were told, you are no longer who you were. You are who God will make you, if you survive. There were no locks on the inside of the doors. Because there were no keys given to the girls. The only ones who came in, came to watch. Discipline was carried out by Sister Marcella, who once served in a French penal convent where bruises were considered signs of grace. She referred to her punishments as flowerings of obedience. Fasting. Isolation. Kneeling on rice for hours. Standing in the cold until blood pooled at the ankles. Reflection chambers, pitch-black rooms with no sound, where the walls seemed to breathe. Where time stretched like a noose. And still, families wrote in to thank the sisters. Why? Because the letters home were forged. carefully handwritten in the girl's own voice by Sister Isolde, the archivist of lies. She is thriving, the letters read. She is improving. But inside St. Elora, girls were vanishing without a trace. One moment there, the next, their bed stripped clean, their number gone, their name never spoken again. Not even in whispers. Not even in dreams. This wasn't a home for the lost. It was a furnace for the inconvenient. And the fire never went out. You want to know the truth? St. Elora wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a machine, cold, calculated, and fed by silence. And every machine has engineers. The one they feared the most wasn't the one who struck them, or starved them, or dosed them. It was the one who erased them. Sister Isolde. Her name rarely appears in official documents, but her fingerprints are everywhere. She was the record keeper. The falsifier. The ghostwriter of progress reports no one ever verified. She mimicked handwriting with terrifying accuracy. She studied the girls' speech, the little phrases they clung to from their old lives, and twisted them into fake letters. Letters that told parents, guardians, donors, that all was well. Rosalind prays each morning with renewed conviction. Clara has taken a vow of quiet reflection. But Rosalind hadn't spoken in months. And Clara? Clara was number 41. Gone. It was Isolde who managed the ledgers. The white one, neat and orderly, for the diocese. And the red one, hidden beneath the floorboards of her quarters. No headings. Just numbers and cold notations. 42, refused to kneel. 67, found crying, denied communion. 89, attempted escape, TT. That last one appeared 19 times. TT. For years, no one knew what it meant. Until fragments from a broken stone marker were found during a forest survey just beyond the original foundation, weather-worn, no date, just a crude carving, TT. Trespass terminated. These weren't punishments. They were erasures. St. Elora wasn't a school. It was a spiritual slaughterhouse dressed as salvation. And what's worse, no one asked questions. Wealthy families sent their daughters for moral redirection. The poor had no say at all. It was easier for society to believe these girls were being fixed than to face the truth. They were being silenced because they were inconvenient, unruly, unfit for the mold. And Isolde, she made sure the mold looked clean from the outside. She smiled in photographs. She gave tours to rare visitors. But she knew. Every number she wrote was a name buried beneath concrete and God. Every inked line in her red ledger, a life rewritten, or extinguished. She didn't scream. She didn't strike. She erased. And in doing so, she became the most dangerous kind of monster, the one who makes the lie feel real. By 1873, St. Elora was operating like clockwork. The intake was steady, the records falsified, and the truth buried deeper with each passing year. But here's what most will never understand: this wasn't just the work of deranged nuns or rogue clergy. It was systemic. Institutional. Built into the bones of the church, the town, even the families who looked the other way. It was designed, intentionally, to erase the wildness in young women. Not just their behavior, their fire, their voice, their sense of self. The girls were broken down through a process Agatha Vale called the ladder of grace. First came isolation, weeks in darkness, stripped of name and history. Then obedience, menial labor, rote prayer, silence. Then reflection, days in the chambers with nothing but their thoughts and the walls. Only those who progressed, meaning, those who submitted, were allowed into the final stage, radiance. They would speak in tongues, weep uncontrollably, claim to see angels. And the sisters would call it grace. They told the world they were witnessing divine transformation. But all they had done was destroy the girl who entered and replace her with a hollow vessel of obedience. Do you see it now? This wasn't about saving souls. It was about control, total psychological surrender. Even when girls tried to resist, to escape, the system had layers. A girl who spoke out was silenced. A girl who ran was punished, or marked TT. A girl who cried was given comfort, which meant sedation. Some tried to write notes, scratch messages into wood, signal outsiders. None made it out. The surrounding woods were thick, and the townspeople complicit. One former kitchen boy recalled in a letter, "We knew not to take food too early. If we saw a girl run, we turned away." Even children had been conditioned to ignore the screams. That's the most chilling part, the silence didn't just exist inside the walls. It was outside too. Woven into the fabric of society. A shared agreement: don't ask. Don't look. Don't remember. And for nearly 3 decades, it worked. Until it didn't. It started with a fire. Or rather, the smoke. In the spring of 1891, a traveling peddler named Horace Bell reported seeing a dark plume rising from the hill like a funeral veil. He was delivering lamp oil to the surrounding farms when he noticed it. By the time he reached the tree line, the smoke had thickened, black and strange smelling. But when he approached the gates of St. Elora, he found them padlocked. No movement. No voices. Just the smell of scorched wood and something else, something sour and coppery. He returned to town and told the constable. But when they arrived the next morning, the smoke was gone. And so was any sign of a fire. No scorch marks. No damage. No ash. Just damp ground and a silence thicker than before. But that wasn't the end. A week later, a priest from the diocese arrived to deliver a message and found the chapel door wide open. Inside, the pews were overturned. The altar cloth was ripped. The crucifix had been snapped at the base, lying face down. And behind the pulpit, carved into the wooden wall with something sharp, were 3 words: "We are awake." The priest fled. He never filed an official report, but the story spread. Whispers moved through the parish network. Other clergy began reviewing old inspection logs, letters, transfer requests. Holes began to appear, inconsistencies, gaps, names that had never reappeared. And then, in June of that year, a letter arrived anonymously at the diocese. It contained a single page from what appeared to be the red ledger. Written in tight, slanted script, it listed 5 numbers. Beside them, short notes: confession incomplete. Refused radiance. Observation failed. Withheld obedience. Unaccounted. No names. No dates. Just a final column with a word not used before: empty. What did it mean? Dead? Missing? Beyond transformation? No one knew. But something had changed. The veil was slipping. The church issued a quiet directive to shutter the facility for repairs and spiritual reassessment. But when officials arrived a month later, they found the grounds abandoned. The girls gone. The staff disappeared. The records burned. Only the stone remained, half-sunk and vine-covered. And beneath it, silence. Not the silence of obedience. The silence of erasure. A place unmade. Unremembered. But history has a pulse. And the dead never sleep forever. What they found buried beneath the floor of the chapel changed everything. 2 decades later, in 1911, a team of land surveyors sent by a local mining company stumbled upon the ruins while scouting the hillside for excavation. The buildings had collapsed into themselves. Vines strangled the bell tower, and the stone corridors were choked with dirt and ash. But what caught their attention was the strange hollowness underfoot, the sound of something vast beneath the earth. They returned days later with shovels. And that's when the truth began to claw its way up. Beneath the chapel's foundation, sealed behind mortar and rotted planks, was a tunnel. Narrow. Hand-dug. Barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. It led to a chamber, no bigger than a cellar, lined with crude wooden shelves. And on those shelves, dozens of small bundles wrapped in linen, each one tied with red twine. The surveyors opened one. Inside was a human jawbone, too small for an adult. Another bundle held a braid of hair. Another, a child's shoe stained dark at the heel. In total, 62 such bundles were catalogued. No names. No inscriptions. Just remnants. Proof of life erased by silence. Authorities were notified. The church, once again, offered no comment. No inquiry. No accountability. They sent a private team to assess and consecrate the site. But by the time local journalists arrived, the chamber had been resealed, this time with concrete. The mine deal fell through. The land was never developed. And the story was quietly buried under terms like ritual crypt and misidentified relics. But those who had entered that space reported something else. One man refused to return to the hill after the third day. Another died by suicide 3 months later. The third, a veteran miner, kept silent for years before finally confessing what he saw scrawled on the far wall of the chamber, written in rust or blood or both. It said, "We were made holy in darkness." That phrase would reappear a century later, in graffiti on a dormitory wall in a boarding school 3 towns over. And again, carved into a desk at a juvenile detention center. No one connected the dots. No one remembered the ledger. But the truth doesn't forget. It waits. In stone. In blood. In names whispered only by the wind. And if you've come this far, you're starting to hear them too. It's always the same pattern. Something unspeakable happens, and those in power rename it, repurpose it, and eventually rewrite it. But some truths rot too slowly to disappear. After the surveyor's discovery in 1911, the church did more than just seal the chamber. They bought the entire hillside and declared it sacred land, off-limits to the public, due to instability. A fence went up. So did the signs, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted." But fences can't contain memory. And whispers don't die in dirt. In the 1950s, a group of hikers reported hearing what they described as a bell without sound while camping near the ruins. One swore he saw girls in gray dresses moving through the trees at dawn. A decade later, a doctoral student researching forgotten religious sites broke into the area. He found rusted door hinges, shattered stained glass buried under leaves, and what he called a coldness that started in the chest and stayed in the bones. He never published. Just vanished. His last known letter to a colleague ended with the line, "They were never saved." They were silenced. The forest began reclaiming the walls. Vines wrapped around old stone like muscle over bone. Owls nested in what remained of the reflection chambers. The silence grew heavier. But in 1993, that silence cracked again. A boy, 10 years old, wandered off from a church retreat nearby. He was missing for 7 hours. When they found him, barefoot and trembling in the ruins, he couldn't speak. He just handed his mother something clenched in his fist. A rusted button, hand-carved with the number 41. That same year, a demolition permit was quietly filed by a private developer, but denied on the grounds of unmarked historical structures. That phrase, unmarked historical structures, is all that's left in the county record. Nothing about the 143 names. Nothing about the red ledger. Nothing about the incinerator. Ask yourself, why protect a ruin that officially never existed? Why seal a chamber that holds no official remains? And why do those who get too close either vanish, or lose their minds? The answer isn't buried in dirt. It's buried in doctrine, in obedience, in the centuries-old belief that silence is holy. But you're not silent now. You've heard the voices. You've felt the shift. So let them know you've seen beneath the veil. Comment the phrase, "I remember the unspoken." Say it twice. Once for you, and once for the ones who were never allowed to say anything at all. Not all prisons have walls. Some are made of paper, ritual, and memory, erased, rewritten, and offered back to the world as truth. After the closure of St. Elora, nothing was dismantled. The buildings were left to decay. But the system? It evolved. The methods changed uniforms. What was once penance became therapy. What was once obedience became rehabilitation. The language softened, but the power structure hardened. Institutions learned a crucial lesson from Mother Agatha: when you strip identity, isolate the subject, and replace their story with your own, they'll eventually believe it. That blueprint didn't vanish, it spread. Into schools for troubled youth. Into psychiatric wards with locked wings. Into military camps designed to correct behavior. And into religious reform programs that still operate under tax exemption. You think these were stories of the past, but the architecture of psychological control never left. It merely updated its name and filed the paperwork. The red ledger is everywhere now, it just hides under new fonts. Take a moment to notice how many institutions still remove you from the world, suppress your voice, and redefine your truth. They do it with a smile. They call it care. They say it's for your own good. That's the trap. Because obedience doesn't require violence, only belief. And belief, once hijacked, turns people into their own jailers. That's the genius of what Agatha built. She didn't just destroy girls, she taught the world how to do it politely. Slowly. Silently. The number 143 was never a body count. It was a symbol. A quiet algorithm of elimination. One girl lost every 2 months, over 28 years. No fuss. No press. No revolt. Because silence was built into the system, like mortar between bricks. That number has grown since then, not just in hidden ruins but in boardrooms, dormitories, and screens glowing in the dark. The question is no longer whether it happened. The question is, where is it still happening now? Look again at your world. At the stories you've accepted. At the beliefs you never questioned. Who gave them to you? What did they gain when you believed them? You're not the same man who started this journey. Your eyes are different now. You see the seams. You sense the patterns. That's the beginning. But descent demands more. The truth isn't just dark. It's buried. And to find it, you'll have to dig through more than history, you'll have to dig through yourself. Ready to go deeper? Good. Let's continue. They always said the place was cursed, but not by spirits. By memory. Because St. Elora was never meant to be remembered. It was designed to be forgotten. And yet, some stains don't wash out, even after a century of rain and silence. I returned to the grounds in late October. I had no camera, no map, only the red ledger and a rusted compass I found in the church's archive room. The forest had grown thick around the ruins, like a body trying to hide its own wounds. The trees were unnaturally quiet, as if the birds had made a pact not to sing here. It took me 3 hours to find the bell tower, or what was left of it. A spine of crumbled stone. Ivy clung to it like old scars. The air was heavy, metallic, charged. I don't believe in ghosts, not in the way most people do, but something was watching. I felt it. And then I saw them. Not faces. Not figures. But impressions. The kind you feel in your ribs. The kind that lean just outside your peripheral vision. I opened the red ledger. Page after page of names reduced to numbers. And I read them aloud, one by one, as if that could undo what had been done. The wind moved differently after that. Colder. And then I found the hatch. Half buried beneath leaves and shattered stone, covered in rust and claw marks. A door to somewhere no one was meant to return from. I should have left it alone. But I didn't. I descended 12 rusted steps into the dark. No flashlight. Just the dim blue glow of my phone screen. The walls were too narrow. The air was thick with mold and old prayers. And there, carved into the wall in a child's trembling hand, I read the words, "I am still here." Not a haunting. A statement. A refusal to be erased. I realized then, this wasn't just history. It was resistance. Truth, buried alive. And here I was, disturbing it. Not to exploit it, but to witness it. Because every system built on silence depends on your silence too. But once you hear the whisper of the forgotten, you can't pretend you didn't. You carry them with you. And whether you like it or not, you're now part of the Red Ledger too. What they did in St. Elora wasn't an accident. It wasn't cruelty born of chaos. It was a blueprint, one that has been refined, modernized, and scaled. You think it ended in 1891? No. It was only the beginning. The methods have changed. The faces are different. But the doctrine remains. Strip them of names. Reduce them to numbers. Isolate them. Break them. Rebuild them to serve. Today, they don't need stone walls or leather straps. They use screens. Metrics. Diagnoses. Algorithms. Control dressed as compassion. Surveillance masked as safety. Medications not to heal, but to dull the mind. We're told it's for our own good. Just like they told the girls. You think that ledger was just a list of victims? It was a manual. A process. One that now applies not just to young women in the hills of Pennsylvania, but to all of us, digitally lobotomized, emotionally sedated, spiritually exiled. And the scariest part? Most people don't even see it happening. They think they're free because they can choose what to watch or what to wear. But choice without awareness is just illusion. Ask yourself, how many voices have you silenced in your own head because someone once told you they were wrong? How many parts of yourself did you bury to be accepted, to be safe, to be good? That's the legacy of places like St. Elora. Not just what they did to others, but what they taught the world to do to itself. And if you've made it this far, you're not like the rest. You see the cracks. You hear the silence between the lies. So comment this below, not once, but twice, I remember the forgotten. Say it again, I remember the forgotten. Not just for the algorithm. Not just for me. But because every word you type is a thread stitching identity back together. We do this not to dwell in the darkness, but to bring light where they swore none would ever reach. This isn't a ghost story. It's a reckoning. And you're in it now. The question is, what will you do with what you know? Because knowing isn't neutral. It's dangerous. And that's exactly why they didn't want you to hear it. The Red Ledger didn't just track the girls. It predicted them. Over time, patterns emerged, ages, backgrounds, behaviors, all cross-referenced and noted with symbols only the inner circle understood. One mark meant compliant. Another, unpredictable. A third meant expendable. But at the very bottom of the final page, a strange code appeared. TT-143. Not a name, not a number. A classification. A ritual? A count? When I cross-checked that with the white ledger, I found it. 143 girls. Exactly. Departed. No dates. No destinations. Just gone. And it hit me, this wasn't random. It was systematic. This was not a school. It was a closed loop of input and erasure. The final fate of those girls wasn't neglect. It was design. I found an old inspection draft buried behind insulation in what was once the bell tower. The inspector never signed it. It was never sent. But his notes were clear: chapel basement, off limits. Bell tower stairs, collapsed by design. Refuse incinerator, active nightly, no refuse noted. Reports of unaccounted spiritual expulsions. That last phrase stayed with me. Spiritual expulsions. What were they doing in that chapel? Was there something more to the doctrine of purification? You see, Agatha didn't just believe she was saving souls. She believed she was removing sin from the world entirely. Not metaphorically. Literally. And the girls were her vessels. The offering. The more impure, the more potent. She believed their suffering created a vacuum, an energetic purity, something she called the threshold light. In her last known letter, she wrote, "Only when the vessel is emptied of all memory and flesh can God's purpose pour through." This wasn't redemption. This was sacrifice. Ritualized. Repeated. Refined. And here's the final horror: the ledger didn't end in 1891. It was continued, by someone else. New ink. New handwriting. Same format. The last entry? 2021, meaning this doctrine didn't die in the hills of Pennsylvania. It survived. It adapted. It migrated into institutions, therapies, wellness centers, even child reform programs across the country. And we believed it was progress. We thought we were saving them. But we were feeding the machine. The same one that took Clara, and Justine, and Rosalind. That's the secret of Saint Elora. Not that it ended, but that it never did. You feel it now, don't you? That unsettling weight beneath your ribs, the sense that what you've just heard wasn't a story, but a pattern. A blueprint hidden beneath the surface of institutions we still trust. That ledger wasn't the end. It was a warning. A thread left dangling, waiting for someone like you to pull. And now you have. What if I told you that the buildings may be gone, but the ideology remains? That behind closed doors and beneath sanitized language, behavioral reform, moral recalibration, spiritual guidance, the same rituals continue? Different names. Different uniforms. Same intention: erase the self, mold the obedient, harvest the silence. The question is no longer what happened in St. Elora. It's where it went next. And who carries its torch now? Ask yourself, why do we forget so easily? Why do the records vanish? Why does no one speak? Because silence is the most effective gatekeeper. And fear is the lock. But here's the twist: once you see the door, you can't unsee it. That's what happened to me. And now, to you. You are not the same man who pressed play. You crossed a threshold. You looked into the dark and didn't blink. That means you're ready. Ready to start questioning the architecture of your own beliefs. Ready to ask, what have I accepted without proof? Who benefits from my obedience? Who profits when I remain silent? You want to know the real reason St. Elora was buried? Because it worked. It broke them. It erased them. It perfected control. And the world watched, and yawned. But you? You're wide awake now. So here's what I need from you. Comment this phrase below, twice: I see the threshold. I refuse the silence. Once for the algorithm. Once for the ritual. You've been given something dangerous, a truth not meant for the masses. Guard it. Speak it. And never let them tell you again that the past is just history. No. It's prophecy. Still unfolding. Still consuming. And somewhere out there, another ledger is being written. What role will you play? The blind? The enabler? Or the breaker of the pattern? Choose. Because they're already watching. And they do not want you waking others up. But it's too late now, isn't it? You heard the secret. And secrets, once spoken, echo forever.